Jay Anson's best-selling 1977 book The Amityville Horror presents itself as a non-fiction account, based on over 35 hours of tape-recorded interviews with George and Kathy Lutz, recounting their terrifying experiences after moving into the house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, just 1 year after a brutal mass murder occurred there. The Lutz family fled the home after only 28 days, claiming to be tormented by evil presences, cold spots, slime oozing from walls, and horrifying hallucinations. While skeptics later questioned the truth of many claims, George and Kathy maintained their story and even passed polygraph tests in 1979, asserting their belief that the events were real. Skeptical Inquirer. This story is written in the tradition of that original narrative, a dark, atmospheric, supposedly true story horror tale, grounded in the details reported by the Lutz family themselves. The voices of George and Kathy will guide us. Brace yourself for the descent into fear. December 1975. The Lutz family, George, Kathy, and Kathy's 3 children, Daniel, 9, Christopher, 7, and Melissa, Missy, 5, arrive at 112 Ocean Avenue, a stately Dutch colonial in a quiet Amityville neighborhood. The price? A bargain, $80,000, reduced due to the gruesome DeFeo murders just 1 year earlier. They bring with them most of the furnishings left behind, including the beds in which the DeFeos died, purchased for another $400, with the hope that familiarity would help them settle in. Inside, as George tours the house, an inexplicable chill settles, even with fireplaces roaring. The children laugh, unaware of the history embedded in the walls. But something unseen watches from the shadows. A Catholic priest, Father Ralph Pecoraro, is called in to bless the house. Standing in a second-floor bedroom, he begins the rite in Latin. But abruptly a harsh voice, not his own, snarls, "Get out!" He stumbles backward, abandoning the blessing. Later, he develops blisters on his hands resembling stigmata, and he becomes ill with flu-like symptoms that last weeks. He warns the Lutzes, never sleep in that room. By the second evening, the family senses something wrong. Cold spots, intense, localized, freeze parts of the house even near the fireplace. George dons coats indoors. Sweat drips from his temples despite the chill. Kathy feels unseen touches. A brush on her shoulder in an empty corridor. Doors close violently on their own. Flies swarm the sewing room, even though the outside air is below freezing and no open food is present. Toilets flush by themselves. In some, black residue stains the porcelain like spilled ink. One night, Missy insists she has a new friend, a glowing-eyed, pig-like creature named Jody. Terrified, she says Jody peers through her bedroom window. Daniel and Christopher immediately begin sleeping face down in exactly the positions the DeFeo victims were found, though they claim not to know about that horror yet. George and Kathy exchange worried glances. Night after night, George wakes at exactly 3:15 a.m., the approximate time the DeFeo murders began. In the silence, he hears distant gunshots echo in his mind. He becomes obsessed with keeping the fireplaces burning, chopping wood into the small hours despite Kathy's protests. Things visible and invisible. I can't explain it. I just know I must stoke that fire. The house is hungry. His sleep deteriorates, his temper flares, and he begins to sense a presence watching him from corners. Kathy experiences horrifying hallucinations. In mirrors, her reflection morphs into an ancient, haggard hag. Furniture shifts positions overnight. Daniel claims to see a tall, hooded figure silently pointing at George from across the living room. One morning, the family discovers cloven hoof prints in the snow, huge, unnatural shapes, though later records show no snowfall occurred on that day, raising questions. Compelled by scratching noises, they dismantle part of the basement wall, revealing a small, red-painted hidden room. Their dog refuses to approach it. Carolyn, a visiting psychic acquaintance, screams that it is a gateway to hell. Within hours, green slime begins oozing from keyholes and cracks in the walls, thick and sour black and green slime in the deepest corners. Nightmares plague Kathy. She reports levitating above her bed, rigid and silent. Daniel begins having terrors. Christopher refuses to stay alone in his room. Every corner of the house feels oppressive. George's disposition worsens. He lashes out emotionally. They bicker constantly. The house doesn't allow rest. By day 7, the Lutzes consult a paranormal investigation team and clergy. Ed and Lorraine Warren become involved, though their account only later becomes public. They find crucifixes turned upside down, an oppressive atmosphere, and claims of inhuman forces within. Conversely, skeptics like Stephen Kaplan are rebuffed. George calls off a full investigation when no extraordinary claim is guaranteed, citing distrust and cost concerns. By the end of the first week, the house is alive with dark energy. Each night, the Lutz family slips deeper into dread, the invisible presence growing bolder. They remain trapped in a nightmare with no obvious escape. As the second week dawns, the terror magnifies. The Lutz family's already fragile grasp on normalcy disintegrates under relentless supernatural assault. Kathy begins experiencing sleep paralysis and vivid nightmares. In one horrifying nightscape, she sees her husband George and children lying in pools of blood, in the same positions as the DeFeo victims. Her hair turns shock white. Her face ages decades in seconds. Then she levitates off the bed, suspended silent over the sheets before dropping back with a gasp. George feels an unavoidable pull to stoke the fireplace at precisely 3:15 a.m. every night, the time the original murders began. The flames roar in crescendo as he shoves logs into the hearth, sweat on his brow despite the freezing air. Doors slam and lock themselves. Windows crack spontaneously. A kitchen knife leaps from the countertop, sailing through the air as if directed by an unseen hand. The swimming pool gate is torn from its frame, and hoof-like tracks appear in the fresh snow, ending abruptly in front of the garage. No natural cause found. The family dog, Harry, usually bold, behaves erratically, barking at unseen figures and narrowly escaping strangulation when he leaps a fence, chaining himself and dying in the attempt. One night, George hears marching music echoing through the living room. Trumpets, horns, drums, as if 50 musicians are parading, but no one is there. Furniture is pushed aside as if clearing space for the phantom band. In their bedroom mirror, George sees his father's face, or is it Ronald DeFeo? Distorted, mocking him. Compelled to explore deeper, Kathy and George break through a section of basement shelving to reveal a small room painted red, not on the house plans. It smells rancid. Their dog refuses to approach, trembling at its threshold. That same night, green slime begins to seep from keyholes, cracks, and seams in the walls, congealing in thick viscous pools that smell like decay. Bathrooms fill with black slime, stubbornly smearing despite scouring with bleach. Kathy feels unseen arms gripping her tightly, attempting to take control of her body. Lights flicker. Shadows lengthen. In one terror-struck moment, Kathy glimpses her sons levitating above their beds, silent and immobile, suspended in midair. She screams, they crash back onto mattresses. Missy claims again to see Jody, the red-eyed pig creature, lurking at her bedroom window. She whispers that Jody promises she will always be here now that the DeFeos are gone. Through her drawing, she sketches doors that bleed, figures melting into walls, and Jody looming over the family. Daniel and Christopher suffer nightmares of being hunted by demonic shapes. They scream out, then wake frozen still, sometimes found asleep in the exact positions in which the DeFeo victims were discovered, face down in their beds. The children withdraw, pale, fearful, and their once bright laughter fades. George's personality fractures. Once confident, now obsessive and paranoid. He fixates on feeding wood to the fire, chopping logs hours into the night with trembling, bloodied hands. He lashes out at Kathy in frustration. He claims a commanding voice orders him to destroy, to kill, words he fights to resist. Kathy fears for their safety. One evening, George raises an axe in a trance-like fury toward one of the children. She intervenes. His eyes clear. He collapses, weeping. Later he begs her to kill him, fearful of what he might do otherwise. This brief lucid break comes before he spirals into deeper terror. The paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren are called in, or approach. The house resists them. Lorraine senses demonic intelligence. Crucifixes are found upside down. Ed is reportedly pushed to the floor by an unseen force. Cameras in the basement capture infrared anomalies. The investigators urge the family to leave and offer to bless again, but George refuses to enter the house any further. At the same time, the family's former lawyer, William Weber, negotiates with book publishers. He introduces the Lutzes to Jay Anson. Meanwhile, media crews circle the house. Late-night news vans station out front. On camera, the family becomes a spectacle, but behind the lens, horror continues. On their 28th day, everything erupts. Doors slam violently. Walls weep slime. A bloody red fog fills staircases. Red-eyed Jody peers through multiple windows that appear suddenly in sealed walls. George, gripped by alternate mania, tries again to kill the children with an axe, believing he sees demons instead of them. Kathy fights him off. In the struggle, she falls down the basement stairs, plunging into a pit of black sludge. She emerges, dragging Harry the dog, who miraculously survived, though injured, younger. Miraculously, George snaps back to lucidity, remorseful. He helps her up. Kathy gathers children. They pack only what they can carry. They race up the driveway into their car, slam doors rattling behind. They flee in the dark, rain-soaked night, dog panting in the back, leaving behind everything: furniture, clothes, food. They move to Kathy's mother's house in Deer Park, New York. But the nightmares follow. That first night, slime is said to crawl up the stairs behind them, though it does not cross the threshold. The house in Amityville remains behind, but the trauma does not. Within days, movers enter 112 Ocean Avenue to reclaim the remaining possessions, and report no phenomena. The house sits empty, silent, and waiting. By the end of this chapter, the Lutz family's ordeal reaches catastrophic intensity: violence, levitations, Jody's presence, possession-like behavior, culminating in a terrifying final night and desperate escape. Their trauma imprints forever. After fleeing 112 Ocean Avenue on the night of January 14, 1976, the Lutz family did not feel safe, even in daylight. They took refuge at Kathy's mother's house in Deer Park. That first night, Kathy felt something crawling up the stairs toward them, but it stopped at the threshold. The feel of slime on the banister lingered, even though the walls were sanitized. Kathy lies awake, facing the ceiling, her mind racing with images of children levitating, Jody's glowing eyes, and the Red Room horror. Daniel and Christopher huddle close beneath blankets. George stares into the dark, the fireplace obsession burned into his memory. George and Kathy begin recording their memories, a total of 45 hours of audio tapes. They recount every icy corridor, every voice at 3:15 a.m., every smell of decaying slime. These tapes are handed to Jay Anson, introduced via William Weber, their lawyer and literary intermediary. The recordings serve as the raw foundation for a narrative that will become worldwide. Anson interviews them in person. 5 hours of additional sessions. Cross-checking the timeline, asking for detail, pushing for emotional intensity. Yet he reportedly says in press interviews, "I can't confirm if the events are true, but I'm certain the Lutzes believe their account." 2 years later, in September 1977, the Amityville Horror, a true story, is published by Prentice Hall. It sells millions of copies. Anson earns only a modest advance, under $4,000, about $19,000 today, but royalties and film rights turn that into tens of thousands. George and Kathy get a share from the book, but not from the movies. Within months, the Lutzes are thrust into the glare of reporters, talk shows, and horror film producers. The house becomes a spectacle. George, exhausted and haunted, is confronted by TV anchors asking if he could stab his own children, questions dredging nightmares back into waking nightmares. The first film adaptation, 1979, becomes a box office hit. Actors James Brolin and Margot Kidder tour the house with the press. Kidder later says in interviews the whole ordeal felt staged. "Nothing happened," she claimed, and was told to say otherwise for promotion. "They feast on our fear. Every headline, every camera click, they harvest it." Kathy reads fan letters and supportive mail, but also death threats. She retreats into herself, climbing out of bed in darkness, sobbing quietly. Yet she still believes her story, though sometimes she wonders, was it all created to escape the house? The trauma feels real, even if the truth has been sanitized or embellished. As praise rises, so does backlash. Stephen Kaplan, a Long Island parapsychologist and skeptic, publishes the Amityville Horror Conspiracy in 1995, denouncing the story as a hoax. He points out that the Red Room was a known closet, not secret, and that new owners reported no strange phenomena. He claims the narrative was partly concocted by the Lutzes and Weber over bottles of wine. Kaplan gathers letters from locals who grew up near the house. Many say nothing happened, even neighbors who lived adjacent. Some insist only the Lutzes reported activity, a single family in isolation. Elsewhere, paranormal circles defend the story. Ed and Lorraine Warren, who visited the house briefly, insist they were overwhelmed by darker forces and claim spirits may still lie dormant in the structure. Tony Spera, the Warrens' son-in-law, says the entity could reawaken if someone with weak will or occult practice enters. "Kathy, they say we lied. I remember cold spots. I felt hands. My children screamed. Was it all in our minds? Or did we draw it here with desperate invocation?" The Lutzes face lawsuits. The DeFeo family sues them for using their name. The Cromartys, who buy the house in 1977, sue for failing to disclose the haunting. The Lutzes countersue. but in 1979 Judge Weinstein dismisses claims. In court filings, George and Kathy admit virtually everything in the book was fictionalized. Weber's quote appears in People magazine. I know this book is a hoax. We created it over many bottles of wine. Despite attempts to refute, George maintains publicly that most events were true. He undergoes a polygraph in June 1979 with top examiners. While results do not indicate deception, skeptics argue polygraphs are unreliable. Kathy becomes reclusive. She divorces George in the late 1980s. They keep cordial contact. She dies in 2004, George in 2006. Their children, now adults, largely avoid the spotlight. Some express regret. Others claim trauma, though denying the story's supernatural elements. One later stepson criticizes the narrative as exploitation. Lorraine Warren's psychic insight is dramatized. In Seance with Kathy, she sees swirling dark energy around George, catches glimpses of Ronald DeFeo's visage, and senses the Red Room's spirit beckoning. She falls back, panting, claiming a demon has locked her in vision. Ed, shaky, vows to stand guard, but George won't return inside. The family's dynamic fractures. Children oscillate between fear and confusion. Daniel, the eldest, grows quiet and distant. Christopher and Missy cling to Kathy. At times, George's mood shifts violently, then drops into deep guilt and rain-soaked prayer. Their conversations are filled with repetition. Did you hear? Did you feel? Each member bears horror differently. None truly escape. Over the decades, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue changes hands multiple times. Each subsequent owner reports nothing paranormal. The windows, which give the house its iconic evil eye look, are altered or removed. Front address is changed. The boathouse is renovated. But the legend remains. Tourists and thrill seekers still gather. Documentary crews, horror podcasts, and believers treat it as pilgrimage. Hans Halser once opined the land itself might be tainted, built on an unrecorded native burial site, and perhaps that ancient residue drew DeFeo's demons. Others argue, the trauma itself, the media, and the cultural appetite for supernatural sensationalism are as haunting as any spirit. Daniel, 40 years later. They say it's a myth. But in my nightmares, the red-eyed friend returns. Jody calls me. I hear the music marches through my skull at 3:15 a.m. So who holds the truth? The believers, Ed and Lorraine, Kathy, Daniel, countless readers and viewers who still feel the chill. Or the skeptics, Kaplan, former neighbors, journalists dissecting every claim. But the legacy endures. More than 20 films, endless debates, haunted house tours, podcasts, documentaries. Even in 2024 to 2025, when the house last sold for over $1.1 million, the value lies not just in real estate but in its dark mythology. Kathy's memory echo. We believed. But what if what we brought home was inside us? Yet I remember fingertips on my skin. I remember slime. I remember Jody. Truth and fiction entwined in cold marble corridors and leaking walls. The Amityville Horror is less a single story than a mirror, reflecting our fears, our doubts, and our endless fascination with what lurks just beyond belief. The Lutz family fled. But the horror stayed. Was it ghosts? Was it guilt? Or something much darker? Decades later, the house stands. Silent, changed, but never forgotten. Because in Amityville, some doors don't just open, they wait. This was Dark Horror Bytes. Subscribe, if you dare. And remember, Not every haunting ends when you leave the house.